A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel. I would want to start by wishing everybody a very happy International Women's Day. Um, Personally for me, it's just so incredible to be in a room full of all women and celebrating the day together. And I hope all of you are having a good time networking with all brilliant women around you, including yourself. Yep. With that, thank you so much for joining us in the very last stretch of the conference. And welcome to the panel on responsible AI, democratization of AI tools, and AI for sustainability. We will be exploring some themes around how AI can lead to more creative, inclusive, and sustainable future. And yep, it's a privilege to be speaking with all these incredible women panelists over here. And I would probably like to start by introducing all three of them. So to my very left, I have Minsu Thigpen. She's a senior product manager at Microsoft and working on responsible AI tools, both in open source and Microsoft's AI platform, to ensure that the next generation of AI-based experiences are built with quality and safety in mind. She did her bachelor's in applied mathematics from Brown University. And I also got to know that she did her bachelor's of fine arts from Rhode Island School of Design. So that's awesome. She also works at the intersection of AI ML design and social sciences to empower ML practitioners to work more ethically and responsibly. To her left, we have Professor Donti. She is an assistant professor and the Silverman Family Career Development Professor at MIT EECS and LIDS. Her research focuses on machine learning for forecasting, optimization, and control in high renewable power grids. She's also the co-founder and chair of Climate Change AI, a global nonprofit initiative to catalyze impactful work done at the intersection of climate change and machine learning. She received her PhD in computer science and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University and is also a recipient of the MIT Technology Review's 35 Under 35 Award. To her left is Devon Chen. She's an associate partner with Quantum Black, AI by McKinsey. She leads AI and digital consulting engagements, primarily in the PNC and life and annuities insurance space. She began her career as a data scientist at a boutique consultancy, which was later acquired by McKinsey. And at McKinsey, she serves clients launching or scaling analytics transformation and helping them with their digital analytics strategies. Devon graduated from Princeton with a bachelor's degree in operations research and financial engineering. So thank you so much for making the time to come here. Probably with that, I would request all three of you to probably take a few minutes and introduce yourself and also highlight the exciting work and the projects that you're currently working on. Yep. Cool. Okay.
I'll take this one and then we'll share and you guys can share.
Perfect.
It's all about sharing, guys. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Minsu. You've heard all these wonderful words about me, but really what I would like to say about myself is that I found myself in responsible AI at Microsoft because it's something that I wanted to, it ended up being a place where I could marry a lot of my interests that are not necessarily just technical. So, you know, my first love was with painting and with art, and through that I actually ended up in a lot of, you know, humanities-centered things and philosophy and, you know, social justice work and organizing. And then, you know, I had like this day job, which was a benefit of my second love, which was applied math, specifically in probability. And to marry those two things together was to find where I could have impact on day-to-day people whose lives are touched by this technology, often in unfair or discriminatory ways. And if, you know, I could do something within a corporation to help alleviate that or create tooling where everyone using these kinds of technologies would be able to alleviate that in some way, I thought that was the best use of my time here. So through that, I've been able to work on some really great tools. I've been in the AI space for about 6 years now. I started off working in the open source space with Microsoft's Interpret ML and FairLearn projects, which for traditional ML introduced open source technology and methods for explaining and mitigating a lot of the things that black box models would do. And then being able to kind of very quickly accelerate into the generative AI space in the past 2 years has been really interesting as well, because a lot of the responsible AI tooling that we would use for machine learning are not so applicable in the generative AI space. And so now in my days, I am actually working very hard on providing an evaluation and safety assessment tooling and framework for AI platform under Azure to our day-to-day, everyday AI, app developers and data scientists looking to work with, large language models and large multimodal language models. So with that, I will pass this off.
Oh, and I'll use mine. Awesome. Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Priya Donti, I use she and they pronouns. And yeah, I mean, again, you heard my bio, but basically my work focuses on leveraging machine learning for climate action, specifically in the electric power sector. So interestingly, my kind of journey into machine learning and data science was one that I made a little hesitantly initially. So I knew kind of starting in high school that I wanted to work on climate change related issues. I mean, climate change is one of the most pressing issues that we're facing today. And it also has huge ties to global equity in the sense that we're already seeing many inequities in the world, and climate change is positioned to unfortunately exacerbate them. And so this really motivated me wanting to kind of work on climate in my career. And I 100% thought that I was going to do this by becoming a materials scientist and working to create more efficient next generation solar panels. And when I got to undergrad, it turned out that I was okay with my chemistry classes, I suppose, but that I really liked computer science. And at the time, it just was not at all clear to me how computer science and climate connected up at all. And so I kind of begrudgingly, had a little soul search. I was like, okay, let me do these things in parallel. Let me see if they connect up. If they don't, I will figure it out. Something will happen. And so I did a computer science major and like an environmental studies minor and just kind of went forth. And towards the end of undergrad, kind of found this paper that talked about how AI and machine learning would actually be really critical in enabling us to integrate renewable energy into the power grid. And so I got super excited about that area and started working then at this intersection of AI and power systems. And the reason I kind of bring up that story is to basically mention that often when we talk about kind of responsible AI or democratized AI or all of these topics, we sometimes start from the frame of kind of believing that AI is a good thing in and of itself, and therefore that responsibility and democratization mean using it in the best way possible. But I think it's actually really important to take that additional step back and say, what are we using it for? Kind of what are the societal benefits that we're really trying to enable? And then understanding whether AI, machine learning, whether these tools are in fact the right tools for those, or whether they play a role. It may not be an end-to-end role, it may be one particular piece. But then figuring out, okay, so what are we using these tools for? And then once we've actually are happy that we're using tools for things that we actually believe in and that are moving the needle on responsibility and equity on a social good, then we ask the question, are we doing that in an ethical and responsible way? And so, yeah, I think that's just a super important part of really conceptualizing what it means to do good work in this area.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Devin Chen again. As an associate partner at Quantum Black, maybe I'll just rewind a little bit as to how I got where I got, because if you asked college Devin, where do you imagine you'll be in 10 years, I don't think she would have said here or now, but she's very happy that she landed here. So back when I was at Princeton, I studied operations research, financial engineering, and like both of you, actually, I was very, very interested in power grid and, optimization of demand management, forecasting, so on and so forth. Also loved my probability classes. Never thought I was going to go into consulting, but there was a boutique consultancy I was very interested in, specifically because they did more OR-oriented work. So joined that, moved to Boston, loved it for a couple of years. Most of the folks who joined just out of college ended up going back to MIT for degrees at the Operations Research Center there, and I just sort of assumed, okay, maybe I'll end up going that path. Life had other surprises in mind. We ended up getting acquired by McKinsey as they were starting to build out their own data and AI strategy in terms of how to serve clients. I think at that time, a lot of the larger consultancies believed that having data capabilities meant hiring a bunch of smart people, putting them in back offices, having them run models, give answers to our integrative consultants, and then having those guys deliver it to clients. And I think what they discovered very quickly was, the degree of integration that's necessary at the client level, and even within McKinsey itself, really warrants a completely different model in terms of how we think about building, delivering, sustaining, managing anything related to data and AI. And so the real exciting thing about McKinsey was that we could help organizations not just in terms of their technology departments, but across the C-suite. Think about operationalization, think about strategy, and kind of do it in a much more holistic way. So when I joined McKinsey as a data scientist, the thing that excited me the most was that I was finally building models and analyses that weren't ending up on a shelf gathering dust a year later. The second thing that really excited me was, there was this opportunity to not just build a model, but also find a role and a impact that I could create on a team that was more cross-functional inherently. Because one of the pain points that we experienced a while ago as we were still getting our ducks in a row strategically was that having someone who never built a model come up with a strategy and try to provide direction to somebody who had built a model before is a very uncomfortable approach. And so, we quickly sort of reoriented how we integrated our teams between more domain-based expert consultants versus more technical expert consultants. And so I was really excited to become an analytics engagement manager. All through this time, I was also very enthusiastic about the possibility of exploring many different industries and just seeing what it means to be a data scientist for an energy company versus a mining company versus an insurance company or an e-commerce company, and the different types of problems, what was similar, what was different. And next thing I knew, 7 years went by, and now I'm having a lot of conversations with leaders at my different client organizations about their analytics strategy, their analytics operationalization, the transformations that they're going through, where they're struggling, so on and so forth. Maybe what I'll say specifically on the note of responsible AI is that I think one of my colleagues put it really well. Her name's Liz Brennan, and she leads a lot of the firm's thinking on responsible AI, or what we now call AI trust. And that's, if you had asked us 5 years ago how our clients are thinking about AI trust, they would say, it sounds like a nice to have one day. Like, we'll get there. If you ask them now, all of them are saying, we need this and we need it yesterday. And I think there are a couple of forces that set that into motion. Of course, Gen AI being one of them, and another one being, frankly, an escalation in cybersecurity threats and attacks, as well as maturing legal and regulatory considerations. So just the level of maturity that's now needed in order to come to the playing field in terms of harnessing the power of AI and data is just at another level. And this is great for a variety of reasons. But maybe I'll let Anisha get back to the questions, and we can take her from there.
I was on the other side of that.
Okay.
No, thank you to all three of you for sharing your journey till here and about your projects. I think just before we came up on the stage, we were all discussing that how diverse the panel is from their experiences with AI. But I think all of us found a common theme here, love for probability and optimization. So that's awesome. And Devon, just it was super interesting, and loved hearing that people are moving from we'd love to have it someday to we needed it yesterday. That's just inspiring to know. One little quick note, Professor Dante, like what you just mentioned about your work on climate change and machine learning. So I come from a city called Delhi in India, and unfortunately, that's the world's most polluted city in the world. And it's just very inspiring to see the kind of applications that we can use data science and machine learning for to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. So super inspiring. Yep. With that, I think we can delve into our discussion. Um, just before that, I feel like it's very important to acknowledge the multifaceted nature of AI democratization. It could be related to access, use, deployment, and just like democratizing the benefits. Given your diverse experiences and the kind of projects that you just mentioned, would love to hear from you what AI democratization mean for you or for the space that you work in, and what are some of the aspects that excites you the most about it? Yep. Either Mitsu or Devon, anybody who wants to go first. Go.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna pick up a thread from Devon about your like clients' leadership saying, "Oh, like 5 years ago it was nice to have, but today it's a must-have." I must admit, I'm on the other side of that, like as a technology builder for these, consumer products and enterprise products for organizations like McKinsey and other big firms to use our like AI platform tools and services for AI. That has also been my experience is building a lot of these tools to get ready for this moment. So we've been building these tools for 5-6 years. I think we started in earnest back then, from the research to getting that research into product and being able to get it out to customers. And the main thing that we've always gotten stuck at was we would put these things out and then, our customers would say, oh, like responsible AI tools are nice to have, but, that's kind of like in the horizon of 6 months to 1 year out. It's like not a horizon one problem. It's a
And it
horizon.
stays 6 months.
I know.
Like 6 months later, it's still another 6 months.
Yeah, if you ask them in like another 6 months, they're like, oh yeah, another 6 months, and then we'll be ready to tackle responsible AI. But what has been really awesome about the space that I'm actually able to contribute to right now as the technology maker is what is the form, in your equation of like, okay, do we figure out what is the right technology for the situation? And then do we, after that, how can we most ethically and responsibly do that? The first question is like a philosophical question, right? It's like, there is a nail. Do we take a hammer to it, or is there like people in technology tend to like come up with the most, absurd tool for a very simple problem, right? It's just we are making the technology and then looking for a problem for it to apply it on. That's at least what I've seen. And so essentially, the second part of your kind of framework for understanding responsible AI is then like, okay, how do we, if we have this technology like GPT or OpenAI models or Llama, whatever, then how do we make it ethical or responsible? And that is obviously, as you said, very multifaceted. The place that I'm able to most directly make impact on that second part of your framework is building tooling that will be, very accessible to your everyday data scientist or developer. So where ML or AI used to be very specialized to just data scientists or analysts. They're running Python codes, they're writing scripts, they have notebooks, all of this stuff. They're building models. Now it's like every single app developer has access to a large language model. And these developers have not studied probability. They don't know why this, generative AI model is doing the things that it's doing. It just plugs in an API, and then, wow, you get an outcome, you get a response. But the problem is, it's very different framework for, software development than it was with traditional, code, right? This code with generative AI, previously when you have testing, you have unit testing, you have gates, you have all of these things for deploying traditional software. And if any of those fail, the system will just fail. It will not work. But with, these generative AI or even traditional ML applications, when you integrate it into your code, it will always give you an output. It will always give you a response. And now it's like, what is the tool you're able to, access or leverage in order to make sense of that response? How can you have agency as, this app builder, as this, whatever application you're building with the AI model? What power do you have to be able to get insights into whether or not you can click deploy, right? Because no matter what happens, your tests will never fail in the traditional sense, because you will always get something. You will always get an output. And now we have to create this new framework of evaluating, testing security, testing safety for your average developers. And I think that's a big chasm to cross, actually, because there's so many of these concepts that I'm so used to just talking to data scientists, but now we really have to turn those concepts and usability of those concepts and tools into something that your average developer can be able to use and be able to benefit from. So that's, yeah.
I'm happy to share a little bit from the perspective of our clients. So I would say, in terms of facets of democratization of AI, if our clients are thinking about their own employees as end users, data scientists, folks who want to build and produce models and use data, democratization of AI really comes down to how do we empower our people to be as effective and efficient as possible, right? How do we give them access to the tools or the code or whatever they need to develop models faster and faster and faster, achieve performance that's better and better, and maybe even, to Minsu's point, enable some folks who don't have that same bar of technical understanding to participate in the exercise as well and either contribute to the model building or, maybe even give them some low-code, no-code options for doing that on their own. So not saying whether this is right or wrong, but I will just say that for the most part, our clients are thinking about how to expand access to AI development when it comes to their employee base. When it comes to their customer base, I think they really want to think about AI democratization in terms of how to expand access to the benefits of it. And I would say the two most obvious ones are probably in the dimensions of customer experience, especially as customers just sort of expect a differentiated level of service these days, right? If AI is sort of integrated in the products that are designed for you, the way in which they are served to you, and then the way that they ultimately get delivered to you, and let's say if you have an issue with it, right, how quickly and effectively somebody is able to help you with your query, all of those elements can be and should be improved by AI. On the flip side of that, maybe a little bit less tangibly for customers themselves, AI can very much help drive down the costs of what it takes to develop or support and maintain a lot of products. And maybe the last element of AI democratization I'll mention is just on the governance front. I think the gaps between the employees and the customers is, where does that leave society at large, right? All of us sort of belong to a society that, whether we individually want it to or not, is very much being shaped by the downstream consequences of AI. And the technology is moving very fast, but the regulation kind of moves at the speed that it moves at. And private enterprise, a lot of times, is trying to just keep up with what's capable to make sure that they're not falling behind on their peers. And so they're moving, I would say, also fast, but maybe not necessarily fast enough to manage that. So I would say, I wouldn't call that the most exciting part of it. I think it is the toughest problem to crack when it comes to governance and democratization of the governance of AI. But what I will say for sure is that more AI education, right? More folks who actually understand probability and statistics is definitely good news in this case. And maybe with that, I'll pass it off to the professor here.
I like it, the professor. No, awesome. Yeah, I think building on some of the points from my fellow panelists here, I think one thing that's really important to grasp is that AI is a really powerful tool in society, which means those who own and shape the AI are owning and shaping power in our society. They're shaping how our institutions work, they're shaping priorities. And as a result, democratization of AI really means not just getting tools that are developed by a small number of people or entities out there for everyone to use, because that's actually a force for consolidation. That's a force for the priorities of those who are developing those tools to be kind of put on everybody else, rather than necessarily really asking how AI and the tools themselves are shaped by the collective priorities of society. And so I think this is something that's super important to bear in mind, because many of us do work for large technology companies or work at large universities or large institutions that are developing many of these things and are in many ways a force for consolidation rather than democratization. And so what does it mean then to really democratize these tools? So one, it means building large-scale education and capacity. We need many more people across society in many types of institutions who are able to both, one, be literate in what AI is, when it may or may not be useful for them, what are the things to think about from a responsibility and ethics perspective. And so even if those folks are not the ones literally developing models, they know enough to understand for their organization, do we procure this? What does it mean if we want to do AI and machine learning within our own organization? Who do we hire? What's the difference between a data scientist, a data engineer, and a software engineer? This is actually not common knowledge, and yet it's so important if you're building out these capabilities within your own organization. And so there has to be that kind of widespread literacy, in addition to a kind of bigger spread of people who actually have the skills and expertise to build these tools themselves. And I think it doesn't just come from this idea of, oh, if you just educate people, people have tools. There's a big consolidation of data sets where, again, large companies are the ones who are often able to collect and curate large data sets that are then used for many analyses. And that means that those data sets disproportionately reflect the priorities of those entities who are collecting them, rather than reflecting the priorities of people who are not, who don't have the money or capability to do that. Computational resources are often consolidated among a certain set of entities. And then additionally, the pay in some of these kind of large tech companies, large universities is way better than elsewhere. You see this common phenomenon where actually someone will join like a city government or a power system operator as a data scientist, kind of learn those skills in that context, and then go get hired into a higher paying job in a tech company rather than sort of sticking around in that organization. And that's not that person's fault. They're responding to very real incentives that are out there. But we really need to ask these questions of how do we make it actually attractive to be a data scientist or somebody doing machine learning outside the context of some of these very high-paying entities, again, to really democratize power rather than consolidate it. The last example I'll give to maybe just, again, underscore places where I think I see people using the terminology of democratization when I actually think they are pushing for consolidation is this idea of, this comes up a lot in the movement to improve the digitalization of cities. This comes up in like the sustainability space where we're like, if we're able to collect more data on what's going on in different cities, then we're able to have a better insight into how to make them more sustainable, because we can optimize more things, we can monitor more things. And so what happens is that because cities don't actually have in large droves their own data science in-house capability, they go procure their data platforms and their algorithms from solutions providers. And then they get locked in to those solutions providers, so that if something changes in the way they want to collect or curate their data, or they want to switch providers, or they want to go with a different solution, that's not always easy, because our platforms are not always interoperable. It's not always easy to take your data from one platform and put it elsewhere. Then the entity that has provided that solution also has that capability to really change prices on a city, or to dictate what solutions they will or will not provide. And so it's a situation where people say, it's great if we get technology to many different cities, right? That's democratization. And in some ways it's not. In some ways it's consolidation. So again, just really thinking about who owns this power to shape priorities in society, and because AI is so intertwined with this, the people who own that power to really shape AI shape power, and so we really have to think about who is shaping AI.
Wow, pretty interesting. And thank you so much to all three of you for sharing your definitions of what democratization means. To Professor Dondi's point, it's just pretty interesting and fascinating that to hear the examples that when people are saying they actually mean democratization, but they like in turn underlying they want is consolidation. So
And one thing I'll say is sometimes it's not like I think many of us who work at these institutions, it's not that we want to consolidate, right?
Yeah.
We're working in the structure of institutions and working in the structure of these inequities that exist structurally in society. But I think it's just important to understand that that's the lens we then end up bringing to the table as we try to leverage our institutions to do the best we can. We need to understand that, that we're doing what we can to get the technology out there, but we also need to contribute to kind of getting more people upskilled as opposed to just using the structure of these institutions.
For sure, yeah. I think, Minsu, as you mentioned earlier, it's not as easy as just clicking the deploy button these days because the tests won't fail, but there's so many other things that one needs to take care of before the product goes out to the public. So no, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think I do see some common themes here where you mentioned about democratization of data, how that is something that we want to do first, even before we do democratization of AI, or how organizations adopt AI is also a very difficult challenge. So with that, I would also want to ask, what do you perceive as the major barriers or probably some of the under-discussed barriers in democratization of AI, particularly if you would be able to highlight some of the examples in your field or something that you experienced? And how do you feel like these challenges might evolve as AI becomes more and more ingrained into our daily lives? Yep.
And I can quickly go because I think it's just basically my last comment, which is that we need to understand who holds the money and power in society to really enact these tools and sort of the systemic and institutional structures that lead to that. And in absence of being able to fully change those systemic and institutional structures, which is a long road, how do you make sure that you're working both within those and also in ways that counteract the incentives that come, the societal incentives that come with basically trying to preserve the power of existing institutions. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all of your thoughts, especially as someone working inside one of the biggest corporations. I did not think I'd be here this long. No, but all joking aside, I definitely also, if you look from the builders of the technology, right? Like when you're working inside one of these corporations, you really see how like the sausage is made or the bread is made for vegetarians. Trying to add some levity. So it's, yeah, levity. Oh, got a bunch of jokers up here. So it's definitely from the technology perspective, we always say that what is gold? Data is gold. And information of that power of that type is what gives, it's like what makes AI, or especially generative AI, even possible, is access to data. And also the second thing is compute resources. That is not only something that requires real estate, it requires electricity, it has very negative climate change effects as well. It's how you're able to provision those to the people who need it, like that whole framework. It's like you have a server farm out in Texas. Do you know how to get that compute to someone who's in Sweden? Like, unless you have, it's not just the compute or the resources to run these computations, it's the whole framework that allows the data to come together with the computation resources and then be able to like coagulate into some sort of service or, tools or platform product for people to use. One of the things that came to my mind was around open source and how a lot of the projects that I see, especially in Microsoft research, that unfortunately we're productizing into the AI platform. But a lot of the open source research that happens is really out there. Like a couple weeks ago, the Microsoft's AI red teaming team open sourced a new framework for helping to automate red teaming, which is a huge bottleneck for doing a lot of the testing for generative AI. And when we talk about testing, it's like whether you click that deploy or no deploy, there's the philosophical question of, hey, do you need AI really to do this, or you just want to use AI because shareholders are really interested in these two letters right now? But then other than that question, it's like people don't even know what tests they have to do. They're like, okay, how do I know it's secure? How do I know it's safe? How do I know that it's not going to be, used or used for ill intentions or malicious uses? Those are all things that people don't also have information about. And when you talk about upskilling, I also want us in the role of technology creators to be able to take those guidance, take the guidelines, take the tests, take, all of these steps that people need to be doing. We and Microsoft, because we're developing so many like copilots and generative AI applications right now, we should be sharing with the world as well. And I do think that there are a lot of efforts to open source and make public, all the assessments that Microsoft does internally on their own generative AI applications, and also the tooling that they use in order to red team, do adversarial attacks, and do assessments for whether or not it has hate speech or toxicity or bias or discriminatory behavior. And so, yeah, as the person creating a lot of these technologies, I also want to see more of them out in the world where the community can actually contribute back to it. And I think open source is a great way to do that. But then the challenge becomes, how do we take the contributions from open source and really integrate it back into the product, right? It's like the thing that actually makes Microsoft its money. So that's another problem.
Maybe I'll pick up where I left off in terms of the concept of AI trust, and the thing that we hear these days from our clients, which is 5 years ago, nice to have eventually. These days what we hear is, we need to have this and we need to have it yesterday. And I'll share a little bit about why they feel that way and why it's really hard, and how we're helping our clients. I would say in terms of why they feel that way, there is tremendous upside that, private organizations want to be participating in when it comes to benefits from being able to leverage AI. There's also downsides to be avoided in terms of risk mitigation, right? If you think about operational risk, if you think about reputational risk, legal and compliance risk, all of those, I think, create a really, meaningful dual burning platform to be able to appropriately govern AI. And so, we've developed an AI trust framework that really prioritizes a couple of things. It thinks about what are the protocols, the practices, and the tools that every single client that really wants to be able to tap into the power of AI should be embedding into multiple layers, right? They need to be making decisions at the organizational level. They need to be making decisions at the data and data control and management level. They need to be making decisions, of course, at the actual modeling level, and then even at the application level. And that's because there are many different types of risks that need to be combated. I think Minsu listed quite a few of them in terms of making sure that the models that you build are ethical and unbiased and fair, making sure that, if you have potential threat from security issues, malicious intent, and then even without malicious intent, right? There's always issues around security and privacy and things like that. And then of course, when it comes to things like IP, considerations around changes in regulation and just staying on top of all of that, our clients need a framework to be able to cross-functionally equip their data scientists to do what is right, equip their business leaders to do what is right, so that they can participate in the upsides and avoid the downsides. And so, with this framework, I think a lot of what we do is try to think about again, when it comes back to the processes and the tools, right? What are the main types of risks that you want to be mitigating, or the main types of benefits that an organization wants to be participating in? How do you build up the governance processes, the tools to make sure that you can operationalize on that front? And then I think the part that's really important is how do you kind of monitor that through time? Because as we said, AI is developing very, very quickly. It's constantly evolving, and a lot of the tools that work today really, may not make sense a year, 2 years from now. Plus, Minsu's developing all this great stuff, so got to take advantage of that. But what makes it hard then? What makes it hard, I think, is the same things that even make embedding AI hard in an organization that is not a digital native, which is that for the most part, our organizations are not struggling to just build the best models and get value from it. They are struggling to transition from legacy ways of doing things, legacy tech stacks, into all of the great benefits that are available from cloud-based technologies, from more advanced algorithms, so on and so forth. And that is a tremendously cross-functional effort that takes, frankly, a translator at times to even operate between folks who are deep technical experts versus folks who really, really understand the business well. Now you throw in the compliance and the risk and the ethical angle to that, and the party has just brought another person in, but the complexity has exploded. And so I think that element as well brings a lot of complexity in. Maybe the last thing that I'll say is that apart from having this framework to try to help our clients tackle a really complex problem, I think ultimately the scale of the whole situation creates a lot of complexity in the sense of AI is moving really fast. Clients are actually all across the map in terms of level of maturity. And so, when it comes back down to AI governance and how we can really make sure that everybody is sort of progressing together, that becomes a really hard problem because you're spread in what different organizations are focused on, what is their challenge of the day, is all over the map. And so I think, again, the one thing that I'm very confident in is that more upskilling, more education around how AI works and doesn't work, how to really make sure that the data you're feeding in is indeed gold, because it is not always gold from what we've seen. Yep. I think those parts are absolutely critical.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you did touch on my very last question related to this point on what are the key strategies that we could use to ensure that we can democratize AI. And I would probably want to squeeze in one more question because our panel title says AI for sustainability as well. So for in the audience, if somebody's planning to looking to hear some thoughts on that. So I feel like in responsible AI, one of the key aspects is AI for sustainability too. So if you could briefly touch upon any of your work or organizational initiatives in this domain.
Sure. So to try to answer both questions a bit. So I think one is in kind of our efforts for democratization, making sure that education is sort of a first-class citizen alongside just dissemination of tools. I think that is really critical. And so in my own work, I kind of wear two hats. So one of them is leveraging AI and machine learning for a climate change related problem, which is integrating renewables into power grids. And so on one side, this involves, in my case, basically trying to understand, well, when you're operating a power grid, that's a physical and engineering system where if you don't operate it right, it breaks. That's not great. So some of this is about how do you innovate on the machine learning tools themselves so they're able to respect these quote unquote safety critical constraints on power grids. But then in that work, then working really closely with power grid operators, for example, to really understand, what would it take for them not just to adopt these tools, but to internally build the capabilities so that, for the small slice of problems that those on the outside are able to address, if you have people skilled internally, there's so many problems that need to be addressed for a power grid to be operated using renewable energy. So how do you kind of provide that education on how the internal organization should build itself up to be able to be self-sustaining in this regard? In addition to sort of this aspect of my technical work, I think as was mentioned kind of very early on, I'm one of the co-founders of a nonprofit called Climate Change AI, which explicitly tries to bring together people working in AI with those working in climate and sustainability problems to do work in this area and to provide that large-scale education, funding, tooling to enable more people to contribute to that ecosystem. And so people in that kind of community are doing all sorts of stuff, from kind of helping to better forecast solar on power grids to help us integrate renewables to helping us better forecast floods in order to then understand how we can shape our disaster response efforts, to optimizing heating and cooling systems in buildings or industrial facilities in order to make them more efficient, to even things like using AI and machine learning to accelerate the discovery of next generation clean technologies like batteries by learning from the outcomes of past experiments and figuring out what to do next. So there's a lot of really, really cool work going on in this area. And I think the idea is that there's so much work to do that those who know about AI today, even if we tried, could probably not actually address all of those problems. And so it's not just a matter of democratization, it's a matter of making sure we have enough capacity in the world to address these challenging problems. And so therefore, like, making education, again, a really core part of how we do things.
I had to turn it on. That is really cool. I'm just like blown away by how cool that is. And you guys are probably all sitting over there being like, wow, that's so cool. I'm also sitting up here next to her saying, oh, that's really cool. I guess like that is, yeah, I had not thought about it from the application perspective, because for me, my considerations are very much like at the source or at the base of that. So I think yours is more of like a downstream and mine is very upstream concerns, specifically around like, oh man, people come to, Azure OpenAI or OpenAI and they're like, I want the biggest model and the best model and I don't care how much it costs. It can cost me millions of dollars. I'm Walmart. I have all the money. And definitely, like you don't always need like the biggest model or like the most compute intensive, resource. Like actually a lot of the things that could be accomplished by those large language models today, hopefully, in my view, can be accomplished by much smaller fine-tuned models in the future, and that should be a near future term thing. And so, for me, as like someone who's working in kind of provisioning these AI capabilities to all these customers and users and whatever, making them a lot cheaper is something that will lower the barrier of entry for being able to use these resources and build applications for things like trying to optimize like batteries and model how, oh man, I can't even say it the way that you did. It was so cool. Like how heating and air cooling system work in industry. And yeah, it's like, okay, in order to do that, you need access to resources, but those resources are really expensive. So how can we make them cheaper? How can we make them, more accessible by making them less costly? And then by making them less costly, the other flip side of that is that if you use less compute, if you use something that's less intensive as a resource, you're not going to be using as much, electricity, and your carbon footprint won't be as ginormous as if you're using like GPT-4. And so I think that's sort of the things that I have been thinking about, is making cost transparency of it, cheaper options, scalable options, more accessible options, and then obviously like trying to break it down for users. Like, okay, you paid for like this service. Did you know that like this is the climate footprint of calling like this cognitive services API to speech to text in your application, so that the user can actually see like, oh, okay, it's not just a black box, I can actually see my impact, and therefore I will have some numbers or numerical analysis in order to say like, my company has policy and goals around regulating carbon footprints. This is how we achieve it with the technology that's transparent.
I will just briefly add that I sometimes wish my clients had the mindset of, we don't care how much money it costs. Like, that has not been the experience that I have had. but maybe in this case, it's good that the incentives align, with respect of if a simpler model can get the job done, one that ideally takes less compute power, usually that's the first one we go to because we can test it early, we can see if it's sufficient, and typically we don't recommend going for something much more advanced or difficult to explain than that unless performance is frankly inadequate or the model complexity is the limiting constraint. It's never the constraint. It's always something else. As of right now, I would say, granted, and I should have probably prefaced with this much longer ago, a lot of the clients that at least I personally serve are digitally non-native incumbents, and they are really new to the game a lot of times when it comes to embedding AI at scale in their organizations. And so they're usually looking to start somewhere with very clear, early and easy wins with emphasis on clarity, explainability, and usually those do require simpler models, at least as a starting point. Now, obviously, all of them are dabbling in Gen AI because who isn't dabbling in Gen AI at this point? But I would say that with that, we've sort of been able to take advantage of the level of awareness on how resource intensive it is to run those models versus a much simpler model. And so it's something that our clients are very much keeping in mind, both from a cost and an ESG perspective.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, as Minsu, you mentioned, it's also important to make the clients and organizations that we work with aware that what is the carbon footprint of whatever model we are deploying or the next project that you work on. So really inspiring.